This tutorial is an introduction to the use of SwitchEdit to program the Matisse Light Switch 2. SwitchEdit is free programming software that runs under Windows 10, and you can download it from the Artistic License website at artisticlicense.com. SwitchEdit connects to your light switch via a USB cable. The starting point for programming any show is the patch display, which you can see on screen now. This is where we define the function of all of the 512 channels we have available, and this is most easily done using the fixture library. You can program your own fixtures, but a lot of people use LightSwitch for either single channel dimmer control or RGB color changes and the like. So in this instance, you can see that if we pick up the generic RGB fixture library and we drop it onto fixture 1, this dialog comes up asking us what channel would we like to start at, and 1 is fine, and would we like to repeat it. Well, for this tutorial, I'm going to program a show that has 12 consecutive RGB fixtures using 36 channels. So that should now have everything patched, and you can see that the functions here are red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, as you would expect. You'll also notice in these checkboxes here, the first one says GM, and if it's ticked, the Grandmaster buttons on LightSwitch will control the channel. Generally speaking, for color control, you don't want a Grandmaster involved, and that's why it automatically unticks that. The LightSwitch 2 has 4 pages of playback. The first 3 pages, labelled A through to C, each have 8 memory playbacks, and those memory playbacks can be assigned a fade time. So let's go to memory 1 and look at how we can program that. The first important thing to look at is the level column here. This is where the intensity of each of your lamp functions will be programmed. Now you note that by default it's showing off. It's important to understand that on LightSwitch you can have a channel which is off, that means excluded from the memory, and that is distinct from a level of 0, which means minimum intensity but is controlled by the memory. Now this is really important when you're building up more complex layered fades, but if you're unsure what you need, then assume that it should be 0. That's a good starting point. Now I'm going to program memory 1, which is played back on button A1, to give us white on all of these fixtures. If we bring down the palette, you can see that white is pre-programmed, and we can drop that onto the first lamp, and you'll see that the levels change to 255, 255, 255 to give us RGB at full, which on a calibrated fixture should give us white. You can go through and do that on every single fixture, which is possible but laborious, or you can actually drag that over to the memory and it will program all of the patch fixtures and also put the legend in here for you. On A2, I'm going to program everything to red, and on A3, I'm going to program it all to green, and on A4, I'm going to program it all to blue. So you can see that you can very quickly put in some basic color patterns there. If we go back up to memory 1 and right click there, you've got an option called Edit, Name and Fade Time. The fade times that I want here are 3 seconds. So let's set all of these to 3 seconds. The red. and the green and the blue. So I've programmed the 4 memories that I wanted to use on page A1. Now I also want a sequence, and the sequence that I want to program is going to run between white, red, green, blue, and then go back to white again. And I want it to fade between each of those with 15 seconds per step. So I've got my white, red, green and blue on these steps here. I go to step 5, which is currently defaulting to memory 5. And if I scroll all the way to the end, you can see that I can enter any of the possible 100 memories. But if I go to the fade time here and scroll to the end, you can see that I have shortcuts for looping back. Now there are only 6 sequences which are played back on page D, the first 6 buttons of page D. So I've now programmed my sequence 1 to execute white, red, green, blue. You'll notice I'm reusing the memories that play back on page 1. And the fade times here need setting because I want a fade time of 14 seconds on each of these. There we have it. And the steps after the one that loops back don't matter. And it's quite a useful feature actually, because you can program a longer sequence, and then when you're testing it, just put a loop in at a lower step number so that you can see exactly what's going on. While you're doing this programming, you can see the output via light switch, and that's achieved by going into the Preferences menu and selecting Live DMX Yes. And that will output each of the memories as you select them, and it will output each of the steps of the sequences as you program them. The same is true of this little mimic dialog here. This will show you what will actually be going out of the DMX when you select each of these. Quite useful for checking that what you think you've programmed is actually what you've programmed. When you finish programming the file, then you export it to the light switch. Now, before you do that, go to the light switch menu and check whether any of the other controls are required. You can have the button indicators switch off. You can set their intensity. You can also have it execute a particular memory when it powers up, and you can also disable buttons that aren't being used. For instance, I might choose on this show to disable the B and C buttons because I haven't programmed anything into those pages. I might also choose to disable the Grandmaster buttons because they're not actually in use. So that's the light switch configuration. And then before we upload, we need to connect the light switch to the correct serial port. Now the light switch I'm using today is connected to COM15, and if you press the tickle button, you'll see all of the red indicators on the front panel of the light switch flash on and off a couple of times, and that's a simple way to check that you are actually connected. If you're not sure what COM port you're connected to, then you just go to Windows Run, press the Windows key and R for Windows Run, and type in this command here, devmanagement.msc, and that will take you to the Windows Device Manager, and you can just have a look at the COM devices, and there you can see it's COM15. So if you're not sure, you can look it up very easily that way. But we're on COM15 here, so press OK, and then when we're ready to go, we hit export and press OK, and it will now erase the light switch memory. Whilst that's going on, you see the lights in the Grandmaster buttons flashing alternatively. And then as it starts to upload, you'll see the lights in the Grandmaster button flashing in sync with each other. And then when it's finished, which it's now done, the indicators in light switch will go back to normal. You should power cycle the light switch, and then you can test that your program works correctly.